He served as national chairman of the College Republican National Committee. On Twitter at Alexandra C. Smith. Alex, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. What is America Rising?
So America Rising is the GOP's premier opposition research organization. So we watch Democrats all day.
Wow. Commitment.
Absolutely. We have a nationwide team of trackers around the country that are filming Democratic candidates, including all of our 2020 friends that are popping up in Iowa and New Hampshire. And we have researchers back in our Arlington office who are constantly at work mining out the smallest of details from candidates' lives.
So, Alex, we should describe trackers in slightly more detail. So you've got people with cameras basically attending every rally, every stop by a diner and the rest of it by the growing field of Democratic presidential candidates?
Yes. So to be sure, a tracker is someone who is a professional who has a video camera who's tasked with following around these different candidates. In the last campaign cycle, you might have seen a couple of ads that had Claire McCaskill's private plane in it. That was our guys on the sidelines capturing that footage. So we're constantly watching all of these folks as they travel around the country, and especially with a focus on the early states and the 2020 contenders.
Alex, this is not the most important thing in the world, but I'm curious. So I'm going to ask, what do you look for when you're hiring a tracker?
Well, we look for a professional foremost, in this search, because obviously we want someone who will be agreeable should things get testy. And of course, our trackers are always, willing to leave the premises should they be asked to. But, at the end of the day, they're there out of enthusiasm for the job, to capture the footage, to be able to share that with voters. So I would say it's a mix of professionalism and enthusiasm.
Are you in a hiring boom then right now with Democrats declaring already?
We are. There are so many of them that we need even more cameras to help follow them around wherever they are cropping up. So definitely the times are good in America Rising.
Alex, I would see a couple of challenges to doing what you do. And let me know if I'm off base or if I'm right, then let me know how you fix it. For a candidate who's already run a national race, like, say, a Bernie Sanders, their record's pretty much been chewed over. How do you find something new? And for a candidate who has much less experience, sometimes if any, how do you go about, sometimes they were just a private citizen beforehand. So how do you go about mitigating those two challenges to what you do?
Sure. I think that's a great question. And I think that fortunately for us in a digital age, we're able to use a number of different tools at our disposal. For example, when you mentioned a less known candidate, someone who hasn't really been in the public eye all that much, that's why our tracking team exists. And we have a field team also that goes out and does field research, at local county courthouses and libraries to sort of pick up, any sort of bit of information we can get about that candidate, prior to that person running for public office. And then for more established candidates, there's really something to be said about the kind of eye that our very sharp researchers can take to some of these records. And, facts that maybe used to not be so relevant are all of a sudden. A good example of this is the Democrats in the 1990s who were supportive of the crime bill, candidates like Joe Biden now. That's something that's not going to play well with a 2020 Democratic primary electorate. So that's a new piece of information to sort of put back out there into the ecosystem for people to absorb it in modern times. We also use freedom of information requests. So that's a helpful tool for us in terms of figuring out what candidates are saying and maybe who's saying stuff about them. So there's all kinds of different ways we can kind of attack these sorts of issues.
Alex Wilkes is attorney and the senior vice president at America Rising. She was previously national chairman of the College Republican National Committee. On Twitter at Alexandra C. Smith. Alex, is your goal when you see a crowded field like this, and my estimates are 541 Democrats currently running for president. When you see a crowded field like this, does America Rising say, who's the most viable general election candidate? And then you damage that person and maybe, not the person who's the really, 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 really crazy long shot?
Well, I think that there's value to observing these candidates just as they are in the primary, not necessarily thinking to, who might be the most electable, but rather, are there differences among these candidates that can be exploited, among their peers. So, a great example of this was America Rising was at the forefront of attacking Hillary Clinton ahead of the 2016 election campaign. We were out there early and often sort of defining her as untrustworthy and dishonest and disingenuous. We did that through Freedom of Information requests, for example, which revealed exorbitant speaking fees that she had charged to taxpayer universities and the riders that went along with those speaking events. But also, that wasn't just for consumption by a conservative or Republican audience. It eventually became that way. But actually, people who, were very interested in our content at that time, early on in the primary process, were supporters of Bernie Sanders. We find real value in terms of, showcasing these vulnerabilities just even within the field itself.
So I want your professional opinion. That random Twitter account that tweeted a video of Ocasio-Cortez dancing, doing what this Gen Xer, this ancient relic of journalism, I immediately identified as the Breakfast Club dance. That didn't seem to me like a particularly effective gotcha.
No, that's not the kind of opposition research we do at America Rising. We're looking for specific vulnerabilities when it comes to the candidate's record, when it comes to sort of personal character flaws, liens on property, financial disputes in their past, not cute and fun videos from college days.
I just wanted to confirm because my again, I'm old. I'm a Gen Xer, and I immediately was like, oh, no, this does not do what this person think it does.
No, we like to think of ourselves as practitioners of darker arts than that.
You don't need to scoop yourself on the show, though. If you feel like it, let me know. What's the most astonishing thing you've unearthed at America Rising?
Oh, gosh, that's, I have to go back to those speaking fees from Hillary Clinton, because that was just something that wasn't being talked about at the time. If you can remember from the last decade or so that we've lived between 2015 and 2019, she was inevitable. She was coming into the presidential race with relatively high approval ratings from her time at state. It wasn't until that New York Times article came out talking about the email server that started to really change. But then once the narrative started to sort of change on her, we were able to then kind of come in with these confirming pieces of the narrative. So again, those Freedom of Information requests that revealed that she was charging thousands of dollars to taxpayer universities to come speak. It was just yet another sort of chink in the armor, I think, going into the 2016 primary process, which ultimately, I think, wounded her pretty fatally going into the general elections.
Alex, what's the holy grail of Oppo research?
The holy grail. It's funny because people often ask me, what is the one gotcha moment that's really stood out to you? I would say that we're less of time now where one gotcha moment is going to define a whole campaign. I think that's just due to the way that news is the news cycle runs these days. It's not about just one moment that all of a sudden, makes voters change their mind about something. Although there are some notable exceptions of that. You can look at Joni Ernst and Bruce Braley and the comment about Chuck Grassley just being a farmer from Iowa. I think that was a pretty clear, sort of fork in the road there in that race. But in general, I think that it's about a narrative that's built. And again, the pieces of information that we mine out at America Rising are meant to confirm that narrative. With Claire McCaskill, the narrative, of course, senator from Missouri who was not reelected in 2018, the narrative with her was that she was out of touch with her Missouri constituents, that she just wasn't really voting according to their wishes anymore, and that she was a D.C. insider. Well, what better way to show that than footage of her getting on and off of a private jet? So, again, it's not the one, sort of piece there that makes or breaks the campaign. It's the addition and the compilation of this narrative.
Alex, I could probably intuit the answer to this, but since that's not really my preferred way, I'm just going to ask you this question. I don't know how long you've been doing this, but how has social media changed opposition research? You know, the Holy Grail used to be that there was that politician who said he'd get reelected unless he was caught with a dead girl or a live boy. That's decades old. How has social media altered the landscape for you guys?
Well, social media has definitely changed the landscape just because there's more of a record out there about people now than there ever was before. And I think that that's especially true for younger generations that are looking to run for public office, that there's just more of a footprint out there, that we have. So there's definitely more to the mix. But I would say that the traditional sort of avenues for finding, pieces of their record that they might not be the most proud of, or pieces of their personal life that they'd rather forget, those are still pretty tried and true. I think that the advent of digital media has only sort of enhanced what we do. But at the end of the day, I mean, look, I think that authenticity is a huge driver in what makes people vote. I think that was especially true in 2016 in terms of, Donald Trump being perceived as the authentic candidate in juxtaposition to Hillary Clinton's, disingenuous sort of nature. And so, anything that we can find, whether it's an old tweet or it's, a financial dealing in the past that showcases, that kind of lack of authenticity, I think that that's really what we're aiming for.
I'll tell you what, though, as a reporter, that makes me insane because I've told people when I started covering the White House really in earnest, so the George W. Bush administration, so the first question was, have you ever ridden an Air Force One? But the second question was usually, what's the president really like? And my answer was like, I have no idea. Do you imagine that the president looks at my bright red press pass and doesn't think, reporter, got to keep this to myself? Like, how do you know? I can't, I just, it's not a dig at you. I just find the authenticity thing difficult because they all stage manage.
Oh, absolutely. That is to be sure. My point only was about sort of perceptions and what people sort of generally view to be true. And, if you are who you say you are, I think that's a pretty, powerful sort of driving message to have in your campaign. And if you are lacking in some of those things, like if you've exaggerated parts of your resume, look at John Ossoff, who lost the special election in Georgia 6th way back when now, but, he's someone who had exaggerated parts of his resume. There are all kinds of like tells that you can kind of see out there. And then again, if you have an organization like America Rising that's just mining those details out and putting them out to the public for consumption, and those, details get into the campaign ads and they get into the news stories and they get into just the general ecosystem of what people are reading and absorbing every day, it weaves a narrative that I think ultimately is difficult for some candidates to overcome.
Talking to Alex Wilkes, attorney and senior vice president at America Rising, previously served as national chairman of the College Republican National Committee, tweeting at Alexandra C. Smith. So, Alex, a couple more before I let you go. One of my listeners tweeting at Batgirl_NC asks, "Is there a Democratic version of America Rising?"
There is. Our counterparts on the left are named American Bridge.
I'm going to have trouble telling you guys apart by the end. It's always America and something good.
Well, we feel like we're rising. We're building people. We're building our own side up.
Well, actually, okay, good. That feeds right into my next question for you, which is, what are the rules about how and when, under what circumstances, America Rising can work with a campaign? Can you call up someone's rival in a House or Senate race, or I guess down the line in a presidential race, call them up and say, "You're not going to believe what our tracker got on Joaquin Castro"?
Well, so our corporation serves as a business, a political vendor, and so they're able to contract with, any campaign, that's willing to, pay for services and research. So it's not, we don't sort of face some of the, the campaign finance complications that you're talking about. I think on the business side of things, because the corporation is just a political vendor. Our super PAC, though, that's affiliated with us, of course, does abide by all of the campaign finance considerations and only speaks for itself.
Alex, how does someone get into opposition research?
I think someone who has like a really keen eye for spotting out those details that the rest of us just seem to gloss over every day. I mean, I am just so shocked every day about how eagle-eyed our researchers are and the kinds of things that they pick up on in terms of sifting through, everything in a candidate's background. I think that there's sometimes maybe a glamorized, sort of a character of an opposition researcher. Maybe it's like a James Bond or a spy. In reality, you're doing very monotonous work every single day, going through, tomes of video and text and court documents. And so I think that someone who is, has the stamina to keep reading through all of that and to pick out those really sharp details that could eventually, turn into something, because it's not always apparent. Sometimes the researcher just finds a lead, something for us to press on, whether it's with a follow-up, freedom of information request or, potentially something that a reporter might want to, follow up on. There's always, there are always things that we're always looking for potential doors to open as well. So not all of opposition research is about simply just finding the zingers. It's about finding the opportunities.
Alex, how do you decide when you put something out yourselves and when you alert a reporter? In other words, what's more effective? Do you tweet it from your account? Do you hand it off to someone at the Washington Post? How does that work?
Yeah, we work with a lot of media outlets. Our goal is to put information in the hands where it's going to go the furthest. And, in our opinion, our goal is to inform voters, and, voters still get their news from all kinds of media organizations, digital and not. And, to the extent that we can work with a local media outlet on a story that's, not as Washington based, or with a DC based reporter on something that would be of interest, there's all kinds of ways for us to get out that information. But we're there just to provide primary sources for journalists and to provide help. And, they're free with their editorial judgment to, kind of put out there what they think is newsworthy.
I mean, I'm asking in part because when I was in print media, which I was for more than 2 decades, I used to get these hits all the time. Hey, did you see that so-and-so XYZ happened? We've unearthed footage from, 96 of this person saying the opposite of what they're saying now. And that's why I was sort of curious about which vector is more effective.
Yeah, look, I think that the media is still the most effective way to get that information, although, we're also a very committed rapid response organization as well. So, I mean, you'll see America Rising crop up during important moments, including debates. One time where you can really see, our influence was in looking at the Kavanaugh hearings. There was that video footage of Joe Biden talking about the Biden rule when it came to Supreme Court nominees. If you remember that, that came from America Rising, and we happily pushed that clip out to all the reporters who would listen. Interesting. So when does this become your Super Bowl? Well, I have to say, people kind of think of the off year as sort of a down time, and, not until 2020 would things heat up. But really, as these candidates and these campaigns start to take form. And by the way, as we start to see the opposition research hits that the other campaigns are putting out there on their rival candidates, this is kind of like Christmas for us. Just watching all of these candidates get into the race, and then to have the subsequent, critical articles that follow, which are so obviously an opposition research dump from the candidates who fear them the most on their own side. So, not only are we putting out there the information that we've already been tracking for the last 2 years on a lot of these candidates, but it's fun to see, them add to the narrative themselves by jumping in and by having these rival campaigns sort of give some more insight into their careers. Last one before I let you go. How can you tell when something is
quote, obviously an Oppo hit?
Oh, well, just meaning that there's you can sort of read a news article if you read a news article with a critical eye, and, you see some, small detail from that candidate's past. Maybe it's a vote, maybe it's, some kind of, dealing that they had in their past, but all of a sudden there's this whole story about it. That's probably a nugget that got dropped into a reporter's lap. So we always have great fun reading those. Got it.
All right. Alex Wilkes, attorney and senior vice president at America Rising. Alex, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Great to be here.
We're going to take another short break. We'll be back with more of The Big Picture. Stick around.
This is POTUS, Sirius XM, Channel 124. Politics lives here.
Hey, it's Billy. And I know just where I stand. We're doing it again. My channel is back on Sirius XM.